Hi everyone, welcome. We're in SAA Studios, fabulous place, never been here, absolutely brilliant. I'm going to do a live demonstration for you. Sorry, I'm coughing. That's what happens when you put an Australian in England for a little while. Our legs come out from under us. But hopefully it'll be what you see on the paper that counts, okay? What I was thinking of doing is getting across what I feel is the most important thing for me in watercolour, and that's atmosphere. We can take a subject, reproduce a subject, but for me I always want to put something a little bit more into it. Understanding that painting is a two-dimensional surface where we're creating an illusion of space, an illusion of volume, an illusion of light and atmosphere. And that's what I think I want to get down to you today. So I'm keeping the subject really simple subject, and trying to figure out how to get that message of a nice, soft, relaxing sunny day in Venice. Okay, I haven't done the drawing for no other reason that I like to do the drawing just before I paint, because it's that time when you're actually putting the shapes down that you actually start to feel where the values are going to be, where you're going to put a dark, where you're going to put a light, where you're actually going to put the colours, where you're putting your focal point. And I like to do that just before I start, because then it's fresh in my mind and we're ready to go. So here we go. We have Arches 300 grams fine grain, and just a 2B pencil. That way you can hopefully see the lines dark enough. Just simple. I'm not into doing anything complicated today. It's really the atmosphere that I'm trying to get across. So, quick sketch, messy sketch. Tight sketch gives tight paintings. I want a loose atmospheric painting, so I want a loose drawing. That's really important. If you sit there for an hour, 2 hours doing your drawing, you're going to have a really tight painting at the end of it, because you're going to be so scared of messing up that drawing that you're going to actually paint in between the lines, and it gets stiff, and that doesn't get atmosphere across. So loose, going to have a sort of lost area. You need lots of lost areas are when you just have the colour bleeding out to nothing, where shapes disappear into nothing land, and your mind's sort of obligated to fill in the spaces. Okay, so bring shape in here. We have to have the Santa Maria. A little bit higher than what I was expecting to be, but that's fine. It's a painting. So rearrange your shapes. If someone says to you, that building here is not next to the Santa Maria, you just look at them and you answer in Chinese, French, or whatever language or gibberish you can, because it's a painting. Don't be too tight on what your subject's shape is. If you want to move the shape around, move it around. If you want to add shapes, add shapes. Try and understand that it's the composition which rules the painting, it's not the subject. So your composition is basically how the shapes fit together to give you the feeling that you want, the feeling that you as the artist wants to come across. So if I want loose, I'll take away buildings, I'll add buildings, I'll add anything I like. And if someone says to me, sorry, that building, I can't see that building, I'll just say, je suis désolée, je parle pas anglais, je suis désolée, je suis désolée. And then just walk off, so that's fine. So you are the master, you are the creator. Don't be tied in. So get it loose, big shape, lots of interesting highlights will come across. Here we'll just keep it lower. This is fairly high on this side, on this left side it's fairly high. So I'll keep this side fairly low, bring it up slightly at the end. But it just sort of, it's like music where you've got like the melody which will be repeated and repeated and repeated, and it will build up to the crescendo. You don't want to have two crescendos or two focal points within a painting. You want the eye to go into one area and then the eye to be guided around the rest of the painting. And that's really important. So if I had something really important over here on this side, something which was really interesting, it would only distract from the focal point. So I have to have supporting roles, if you like. They have to be supporting roles. They can't all be the lead stars. So now here's a decision, do we put boats in or not? Get that line fairly straight. I don't know. I don't know if you have an idea or not. I can either do reflections down here, or I can put a few boats. I like going for the if I don't know yet, I'll just leave it blank, and as the painting evolves, I'll figure it out. So at the moment I don't know. So if I don't know, we'll figure it out as we go. Okay, so that'll do for the drawing. Take a mop brush. It's really soft. You don't want to pass across the painting and scratch the surface, which actually leaves you with the line. So you want something really soft. For my colours, I've got Winsor & Newton tubes, because I use a lot of colour. So you need a lot of thick paint quickly. Okay, so they're all in tubes. I have Phthalo blue, which is the Winsor blue, ultramarine blue, Winsor violet, Winsor green blue shade, which I'll use a lot. It's a horrible colour, absolutely revolting colour, but it mixes really well. So that's perfect. Burnt sienna, which is the Old Faithful, which is essential, and then just highlights from everywhere. So the first thing I want to put down is basically the mood. I want to get the mood, I want to get the light in. And the light has to be in from the beginning. You can't find the light at the end. You have to reserve your light areas, and you can build up your shadow areas, but you don't want to lose your light from the beginning. So this is all going to be fairly dark. It's going to be a silhouette, which is automatically telling me I want to have something really light in the sky. Just a dirty wash, which is great because I have lots of dirty washes in my palette already made from previous paintings. So it's a bit of anything colour-wise, although I think I will keep it quite warm. So I've got a bit of burnt sienna, and we'll just put that on in a very simple wash. The same as the drawing. Don't want perfection. Perfection's boring. No one likes perfection. We want character. So aim for character, loose character. Okay. Now that warm, it's burnt sienna, but with basically a wash of ultramarine, which I had in my palette already. That warm colour, I'm just going to let come down into all the buildings, which will actually help attach the sky with the buildings, and then the sky with the buildings and with the water. The water wasn't, the paper was not wet before I started, so this is all now working on dry down here, which is easy because then I can reserve whatever whites I like, keep rough brush strokes as I like, and hard edges if and when, which is ideal. This is great, this brush, because you've got a point to work with, but you've got a really big reserve. This is actually one of the SAA brushes, but lovely, lovely texture. Not used to working with it, but I think I'll adopt it. It's actually really nice. Okay. Break up the burnt sienna with a bit of cerulean blue. Ceruleans are a nice colour, just to give you a bit of contrast, but at the same time soft. And this is just an underwash. This isn't anything that really will be that visible when the painting's finished. It's like the first wash, which sort of ties it all together. Because the painting's dry, you see how it leaves these hard edges, and these hard edges are just not what I want. So this is a clean brush now. There's no, or almost no colour in the brush. soften the edges. Bleed them, let them bleed. Here as well. Okay, bit farther. Okay, so you want to keep this nice and loose. Okay, now I'm coming back in, what will be my base colour, which is burnt sienna and the Windsor green. You have to be careful to get the dose right on this one, otherwise you've really got something horrifically green, which doesn't sit with every subject. Okay, now this blue, we're going to want to repeat it over here somewhere. It doesn't have to be there for a particular reason. I don't need to have a blue building, a blue car, a blue gondola or something. I'm just putting the blue in because that visually is going to look better for my painting. I don't need to explain why. So don't always intellectualize too much. You need to balance your colours, balance your values, but don't always try and justify why. We don't need to know why. As long as it's done, that'll do. Okay. Probably connect those two. Okay, now what I want is I want this to actually start bleeding down, so I'm going to pick up the painting. I usually paint almost vertically, and here it's not moving fast enough, so I'll just hold it vertically for a second. I don't know if you can see, but the paint will start to slowly move down. We can see it coming down here. You can see the drops accumulating at the bottom of the washers, which will just help it become more fluid and less heavy at the top. You see now? It's all accumulating down here. Okay. Now, I still don't know if we're going to put boats in or not. Still don't know. I don't think so. I think we'll just keep it simple. But I may change my mind at some point. That's the fun bit about painting, is you just do as you feel. Keep that soft. It's a bit too hard. Keep that soft. Put a harder edge in there later, but this isn't white, so it wouldn't be logical to have a really white reflection there. So keeping it fairly logical. And I'm going to keep those colours which are up here, I'm going to put them down here. And then we're going to have that balance, which is really going to help when it comes to creating the mood. Keeping the colours in a very reduced palette. Okay, a bit darker as I come forward, which will be closer to the viewer, which will help to bring depth and light into this passage here. Okay. Bring the blue back in. That's actually quite hard to say. Bringing the blue back in. Tongue twister. All right, I'm going to connect it, which means the blue will actually be touching all through here, connected through here and coming down through here, to avoid having one shape up here, a white which separates the two, and then having another shape down the bottom. So that blue is actually going to connect the two parts of the painting, which will visually give it a more intimate feel. We'll come back into that later. Just get that wash in. In the meantime, up here is drying, so I don't actually ever dry my paintings. I just work wherever as they're drying. Okay. A little mop brush You have loads of these brushes. Da Vinci has good ones, which have nice points on them, but have great reserves. Now this, I want this to come down. I don't want horizontal lines here, so we're going to let that run down a little bit. And I'll drop some of the green in while it's there as well. So we'll bring a little bit of that burnt sienna and green mix while it's vertical, and just throw that in. And that will help it have a feeling of a reflection because the lines will be vertical. And as I'm Australian and the world is upside down, we have to then let it run back the other way, because you see how this white line is becoming too big? So by holding it upside down, the water is actually going to close in that white gap without me going in with the brush, because as I'm going in with the brush, I'll start doing lines. I'll start creating textures where the colour will just run in on its own. Once it's closed in far enough, we'll just bring it back. Okay, and that's going to give us a nice reflection. Okay, so this can start sitting. I think that for the moment's fine. So we can start up here, up the top of the painting. This is pretty much dry. It's not completely dry, but it's dry enough. Now my idea is to have these buildings here on the right fairly strong, which will give a good contrast and bring these forward. This building here will be equally as strong, and then lighter buildings which will give us a passage, a perspective through here. So I prefer to start with the darks, contrary to a lot of watercolourists. Start with the darks, although the lights are done. Then I start with the darks and then I go back to the mid washes, because once my darks are in, I have a gauge. I have the light values, I have the dark values, all I have to go is somewhere in between for the mid values to connect them. So I find that personally easier for me. So we're going to start dark. I've got ultramarine. My ultramarine is actually the green shade because it doesn't granulate, and I don't want granulation in parts of the painting and not in parts of the painting. If it was a painting that has texture, that's fine, but this doesn't. It's light and atmosphere I'm trying to paint. It's not like a solid object that merits texture. So let's throw this in. So it's a mid-dark. Well, you know, we're obviously going to go darker than this at some point, but this will be my mid-dark. Keeping a little bit lighter on this side. And do your details at the same time, because you don't want them to look like stuck-ons. Otherwise they won't fit in with the rest of the building. They'll be like little add-ons. It's a bit too uniform, a bit too monotone. All right. Now, I use a lot of white, and when I want white, I want real white, so it's real thick gouache. It's not just watercolour, it's really thick white paint. And it's not for a white, I don't add it. What you see that are whites in my paintings will stay white. But it's because it adds creamy pastel mixes that just don't exist anymore. Every manufacturer is trying to get the purest and the strongest, most saturated colour, that we're losing all our creamy colours. And I like these creamy colours. You can make really good nostalgic greens and pinks just by adding a little bit of white to it. So I really believe that as long as it works for the painting, go for it. You know, there shouldn't be any rules. There should just be creativity, freedom, and taking yourselves where you feel you want to go without hindrance from anywhere else. Let me get some little detail in here. The towel on my board is really to dry the painting, but it's also because my painting's vertical. It stops the paper from sliding down because I don't attach it to the board. It doesn't buckle because I paint on all the paper at once. So for me, it's easier to do it this way. But it's great for drying the side of the brush on. Okay. Go darker still. Dark washes dry lighter, so don't be too scared when they're wet to pile the paint on. It's still not dark enough. It'll do though. Don't want it too perfect. Broken lines, always nice. Just suggesting buildings off to the side. Repeating the colour, repeating the melody, but to a different degree of contrast. Everything in painting is about contrast. How much contrast do you want? How much contrast do you not want? Is it a subtle area? Is it an area that you need to use to pull the eye towards your focal point? Or is it an area that you just want lost? It's all a game of contrasts. Okay. A bit too defined. I don't want that line too defined. Let's mess it up a bit. Got a nice watermark gonna develop down there. So just a bit of water. I had a drop that landed on the paper. But if that happens, there's no reason to panic. You just keep the surrounding area white and wet, and the watermark will go away. So don't panic. Watercolours are correctable, but don't panic. Everything can be corrected some way or another, at least integrated. Okay. Stronger colour, just to bring it forward a little bit. I don't know what's up here, but that's not a big deal. We'll just pretend there's rooftops and chimneys and reflections of things. I don't want it finished. I don't want it to be filled in like it's one big shape which is filled in. I want it to be broken up by little shapes and whites to help it breathe. Okay. And this white, I'd like this light area to actually be like a snake that comes in and out of the painting. I don't want it to be closed off here and then another white to be closed off here. I'd actually like them to be connected, which helps the eye continue through the painting because you're following the darks or you're following the lights and it's actually pulling you forward. So I don't like closing off shapes. I think closing off shapes, which I've done here, I don't like. I always open them up somewhere. I may have a claustrophobic background that I'm unaware of that, I don't know, I don't like that. That's one of the things I like to open all my spaces up. Maybe my Australian land of the big country coming out in me. Okay, so that at the moment, that's fine. It needs a little bit more work, but as the basis, that's fine. This I'll get back to. We'll start adding more definition in here. And I basically just keep going back in over and over while it's still wet to build the painting up. And it's fun. Okay, get a bit of pure blue. my focal point is really low, and I want this down here to attract the eye. So strong colour and strong contrast will be good down here. Be lighter up here, looser up here, more defined and sharper down here, which will pull your eye down. A bit grayer. Put a bit more burnt sienna in to break it up. Really light building, like a ghost silhouette in the background, which doesn't have to be finished. Just help the eye understand that there's something else going on further behind. That it creates depth. It creates a distance. Okay. Might put some white in there too, give it a more smoky feel to it. The white doesn't look white, it's just a light grey, particularly because it's completely dirty on my palette as well. But it just creates a different colour that we just don't have otherwise. Okay. Okay, so we get back into here. Keep it in a similar colour to the two main buildings to balance them. You don't want to have a brown building over here and then blue buildings over here and then something green going on over here. It separates too much your subjects. Which, if that's what you want to do, if it's a hyperrealist painting, that's fine. But if you're painting atmosphere, it doesn't work. If you're painting atmosphere, the atmosphere comes before the subject, not the subject before the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is king. Lovely point on this brush. I actually normally use a little brush for all my detail, and I don't even need to. It's so important to have good brushes. They don't have to be expensive, but they have to have a good point on them. And a spring. You want to have brushes that spring back at you so that your second stroke can just come straight after the first one. Darker down the bottom, which will help seat the buildings. Get a mix of anything goes sort of colour. More brown. Just after I told you I didn't want brown, so that's the look what I do but don't listen to what I say theory. But that brown will come back here, so that will be okay. Go a bit browner. But again, not perfect. I don't want to fill in the holes. I want to leave the spectator to be able to imagine and to be able to add their own story. We can actually prolong it. How do you prolong it? I don't know if you can say prolong in English. I'm losing my English. Extend this bit, just to help avoid a line all the way across. So this building is actually going straight into its reflection, which will give me a different level, a longer level and a higher level, which will be more interesting. Suggest some windows down here. Nothing precise at the moment, but just get a little bit of something which breaks up that big shape. Big shapes often look empty. Okay, this is still a little bit wet, but dry enough on the surface. So as long as I don't go over it too much, I won't upset it. And I still don't know if I'm going to put a boat in or not. We'll see. But I do see, you've got three things working. This is so important. You've got three things working with your painting, but I think I'll tell you them in a second just after a break, because I will just let this dry 1 second and we'll be back in a second. So stay tuned.
Let us bring out the artist in you. If you'd like to learn how to paint or improve your painting, the SAA is here to inform, encourage and inspire you every step of the way. When you become an SAA member, you get so many benefits, including the free bi-monthly newsletter Paint, packed with inspiring step-by-step projects, fascinating articles and detailed information to get your creative juices flowing. Discounts on over 13,000 art products featured on the SAA website and in the Home Shop catalogue, with free order line and free delivery in the UK mainland. A devoted SAA team on hand to answer your questions and give you the confidence and motivation you need to start painting and develop at a pace that suits you. Plus, a free welcome pack filled with gifts and practical help to get you started, as well as the opportunity to make friends with like-minded people.
Best thing of being a member is the inspiration from the magazines, to be able to purchase things at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, you get the reduction on all the materials, the advice you get.
I could shop from home.
It's a community.
It seemed like a very friendly sort of organisation.
If somebody's thinking of joining, don't spend too long thinking. Just join. They'll love it.
Hello, I'm David Poxon. Welcome to historic Weston Park. I'm here today with the SAA film crew to run through our final preparations for the International Watercolour Masters exhibition, which takes place here 28th of April to the 31st of May 2018. So here we are, folks. We're in this fantastic gallery space, the Granary Gallery at Weston Park. In a few weeks' time, paintings will start to arrive and we'll start to select the wall space for some of these great pieces of modern art. From this position here, the artists will be demonstrating their skills. The SAA TV film crew will be screening and live streaming these events live across the internet, especially for SAA members. So make a date in your diaries, 28th of April to the 31st of May 2018. The International Watercolour Masters exhibition at historic Weston Park, supported by the SAA. It's going to be great. See you here.
And we're back.
Welcome back. Okay, it's dried a little bit, just the time of the publicity, so it hasn't been a long wait, so you can see it's still quite wet. But what I want to tell you is the three things which are really important for your painting is one, obviously a technical capacity, but that's not so important, and everyone builds on that as they start learning. So that shouldn't be our main preoccupation. You need to, the two other facets of painting, which we don't really talk about much at all, is one is your eye. The eye, which not only tells you what works in a painting, what subjects should be lifted or left out, what shape will distract the eye, but also when you're painting that you can see this purple needs to come back here somewhere, this brown needs to come back here somewhere, and your eye actually keeps your paintings balanced. And that's really important. So I'm talking a lot about that, but that's really for the visual aspect that I'm trying to get that across to you, which you probably know, but I'm still hammering it home for you. The other point is usually having a clear idea of where you're going, but today I'm just sort of doing more of an improvisation. It's a fast demo and that sort of works well too. What we can see with what's going on at the moment is that I have this lovely dark, which is full of browns and blues and mid values and dark values, and that on its own doesn't really need anything else. Once I start putting some strong red touches, strong blue touches, that's just going to make that vibrate and make it really alive, which will attract the eye down here. But this dark value I have to bring in here somewhere with this brown value, and you're going to see it's just all going to fall into place on its own. And it really is that game of, I want the eye to be here, so I'm going to build it up with contrast in colour, contrast in shape, contrast in values, and I'm going to leave other areas to be more subtle so that the eye can just sort of escape and we're not in this hyper interesting painting every centimetre squared, which just becomes a little bit overwhelming sometimes visually. So what we're going to do now is throw more of this brown paint down here, finish this bottom part of the painting, and I'll see if by then I have an idea if I'm going to put a boat in. But we shall see. Okay, so back to the burnt sienna. That was this brown, burnt sienna and ultramarine wash with more burnt sienna than with blue, and get that in here, keeping it loose, keeping it moist. Actually, it could be really dark in here. Get that really dark. Why do I want it really dark is because I really want something which will connect this dark with this dark. So I'd like to have something in between. It's not logical that it's the buildings behind because I want them to sort of bleed off into the background. However, this building here, I can bring forward, and that will help visually connect these two. See how the eye just all of a sudden it goes from one to the other? So that's how we're going to do that. I think I'll leave a light value in between, just so that that dark's not against the white, just to reduce the contrast. Always on about contrast. It's a game of contrasts. Okay, a bit of green, burnt sienna. You want it a little bit copperish, not particularly green, but more copper. Because I have to repeat this colour that I've put down here. I want that to repeat in the buildings. Now why not bring it up here as well, connect this shape with that. Drag that up a little bit into the building up here, which will help it integrate a little bit better with the colours down here. This is dry now, up here. Connect this one, same idea. Okay, so that apart from a few details, the top part will be more or less left as is, apart from a few touches, but it's really this bottom bit here now that we need to work on. Keeping it nice and loose. Okay, now we want this dark to come back down here. This was a little bit more violet, so I'll bring a bit more of the violet in as well. That's better. Keeping this fairly soft on this side. And I'll darken the bottom again. Oops. That's a bit too dark. Okay. Now, this painting is actually quite low key. There's not a lot of strong colour. That was quite purposeful, but now I'm getting into the point where I'm going to need something to sort of liven it up a bit. So we had the cerulean blue from here before, which can come in. But when you have a wash that's still wet or dry, regardless, it doesn't really make much difference, but you've got quite a lot of colour and you want to put a bright colour on top of it, you can either put an opaque colour, or you can take your pure colours and add white to them, which will help them sit on top of your paint. Because it's opaque, obviously you don't see the washes underneath it, but it will give you a really nice contrast as the dark dull sits next to the bright colour. So we'll start doing some touches of strong colour and then add the water in. I think we'll go for a Windsor blue, which is particularly bright, which will wake it up a bit. A little bit of burnt sienna, and just throw it on. Okay, this is a Windsor blue, which they're colours which fade a lot when they dry. So it looks strong, but it won't be. It won't be that strong. Trust me. Or if it is, it is. I'm going to throw a little bit of this up here as well, just to connect the two, just to give it a bit of a balance between the two. Let that line bleed. Okay, now we're going to let I'm going to have to put the painting vertical to let the water run down. I'll put a bit more turquoise on, which is the mix of burnt sienna and blue, and it will just run down on its own. Okay, this is a bit dry. Bit of water. And we'll let that start running down. Doesn't matter if it connects on its own, but you see how this is starting to move down? It's taking the heavy dirty wash which was on the surface, and it's going to start pulling it, moving it down, and it's going to leave a more translucent veil, smoky veil. And that just can just run. We just let that run. Might add a little bit more because it's not running fast enough. we'll build it up a bit more and let more colour come down. There we go, darker in here. Some whites, not too many. Again, whites over here aren't going to help because we want to draw the eye over here. So bring that in. A bit more water. The water's not for this part, it's for this underneath section that has to be wet enough to accept the water coming down. So getting that in, and you're going to see now it's going to start to run. Okay, that's better.
We've probably got about 5 minutes left, Janine.
That's fine. We'll throw some details in. And that will be fine. These white lines are too big. They're distracting my eye. So soften these. Okay, get a bit of blue, which will repeat up the top here as well. Okay, gives it a sort of a mirror effect, a light veil. Okay, so throw in some details, little synthetic travel brush. Absolutely perfect for the job because they're just so springy. They're just so perfect. You can do 1,000 strokes in a minute, which is probably what I need to do. And they just spring back into place. So you're more or less drawing with them. They're brushes that draw. And as I'm a drawer at heart, they're some of my favourites. Okay. Don't want too many detail. It's just an impression that I want to get across. So, keeping the lines fairly loose, just as they were in the drawing. Don't want anything too heavy. Keeping the idea of suggestion all throughout the painting. It hasn't got my hair. It's going to leave a line. All right. A few details on the big building, and that'll be it. So the end of the story is no, we're not going to put a boat in. But things like that can always be added. You don't always have to draw a shape in from the very beginning. Sometimes if you're not sure, leave it out and give yourself the opportunity to change it. You don't have to decide everything from the beginning. Your eye has to play a role to sort of say, okay, this area needs more work, this area needs less work, this is interesting enough, I don't need a boat. Because there's enough interest in the washes, a boat would have been too much. If my washes were more uniform, then perhaps it would have been a good idea. But in this stage, it's not. So throwing some detail on, just to give it a bit of depth, and then that will be enough. So the idea was to try and bring across an atmosphere, trying to explain the idea of the continuation of the shapes rather than just keeping the shapes in what we perceive their places to be, because a building could be a dark, but because it's got its shadow connected to it, we're actually seeing a larger shape, and that's actually the building and the shape together. We're not seeing them as separate shapes. And that's really important to understand, that shapes are not necessarily what we see, what we think, they're not necessarily a building and a shadow. They're what we actually see, and it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. So let the shapes connect themselves, let the washes connect themselves. Don't be scared to go back in them. play around with them. Let them develop as well. Don't be scared to, if the colour fuses out, run somewhere, let it go. It may have a better idea than you do. It often has a better idea than I do, and it creates effects that are often the best effects in the painting. So let water be a big player in your watercolours and have fun with them. There we go. So we'll leave it like that. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you to SAA for the fabulous setup here and the opportunity, and I'll see you next time. Welcome. Don't forget to come to Western Park in April, 28th of April to the 31st of May. We'll all be there and be ready to wait, ready to see you all, and see you next time.
Hello, I'm David Poxon. Welcome to historic Western Park. I'm here today with the SAA film crew to run through our final preparations for the International Watercolour Masters exhibition, which takes place here 28th of April to the 31st of May 2018. So here we are, folks. We're in this fantastic gallery space, the Granary Gallery at Western Park. In a few weeks' time, paintings will start to arrive and we'll start to select the wall space for some of these great pieces of modern art. From this position here, the artists will be demonstrating their skills. The SAA TV film crew will be screening and live streaming these events live across the internet, especially for SAA members. So make a date in your diaries, 28th of April to the 31st of May 2018. The International Watercolour Masters exhibition at historic Western Park, supported by the SAA. It's going to be great. See you here.